Each time Alien Girl cried, Galaxies died, so he lived only to make her laugh. They called her the Weeping Star, not because she wept like a child, but because every time a single tear traced down her alien cheek, galaxies fractured. Entire systems swallowed by implosions no scientist could explain. She was beauty born of silence and chaos, living in a body too fragile for the weight of the cosmos. And somewhere on a lonely space station, orbiting the ruins of a vanished constellation, one human made it his mission to make her smile, because every heartbeat of the universe depended on it. The interstellar archives didn't mention her name, only a silent report, logged in red, warning of gravitational distortions traced to her presence. No species, no history, just a 5-second footage clip. A girl floating in the vacuum of space, expression blank, eyes wide and wet with silver blue tears. By the time her tear broke away from her cheek and drifted weightless into the void, an entire binary star system collapsed in on itself. That was the first time the human, Commander Ryland Drake, saw her. Not in person, but on a cracked datapad retrieved from the wreckage of Outpost Aaron 3. He wasn't a hero. Not anymore. Just a man stationed on a backwater science platform, assigned to clean up black hole anomalies no one else wanted to touch. But when his ship received the silent distress beacon from the dead zone near Sector Theta 9, curiosity bled into obsession. He told himself it was protocol, that any anomaly that defied astrophysical law had to be catalogued and neutralized. But in truth, it was the look in her eyes that pulled him toward the dead stars. Eyes filled with the kind of sadness that only came from remembering things no one else could ever understand. It took his crew 7 standard days to locate the faint signal, and 2 more to confirm the presence of a life form inside the abandoned exopod floating among drifting asteroids. They thought it was a corpse until the life signs spiked in time with what looked like emotion. When they brought her aboard, she didn't speak. She didn't resist. She just stared. A girl. No, a being, barely older than 20 in appearance, with skin like porcelain under a star's glow and hair that shimmered in layers of iridescent color, shifting with light like liquid moonstone. Her body was humanoid, but everything about her felt suspended, as if she wasn't entirely rooted in this dimension. They placed her in a high-gravity stasis cell with dampening fields tuned to emotional energy, the only thing capable of stabilizing the wave flux her presence caused. She remained still for hours, watched silently by scientists through layers of shielding. They tested her vitals. They studied the spikes in dark matter disturbance every time she blinked or flinched. They learned fast. Whenever she cried, even a single tear, the energy feedback reached catastrophic levels. Sector Control ordered her transferred to a deep space vault, where she'd be kept in permanent emotional suppression. Ryland disobeyed. He didn't have a reason, at least not one the Admiralty would have accepted. But there was something too human in the way she sat alone, hugging her knees, never uttering a word. Not a weapon. Not a monster. Just a girl broken by a truth even she couldn't explain. He began visiting her. First behind the observation wall, then in the cell just close enough to feel the edge of her gravity field vibrate through his bones. She never looked up. Until one day he told her a joke. Something dumb. About a Martian engineer and a Venusian coffee machine. Her lips twitched. Just slightly. A fraction of a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But the readings remained flat. No tears. No collapse. Ryland didn't stop. Every day he sat beside her and told stories. Of Earth's oceans, of stupid Earth cats, of the time he accidentally wore his EVA boots backward and tripped into a zero-G compost chute. Each tale chipped a layer off her silence like cracking the surface of a frozen lake. And when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, fractured vowels layered with harmonic distortion. But he understood her. You aren't afraid? She asked. Her name was Lyra, and she wasn't born. She was placed, designed maybe, or awakened. She didn't know. Her memories were fragments, glimpses of light, of grief, of a time when her kind ruled the spaces between galaxies, but abandoned the stars to escape their own despair. She was the last, left behind with emotions she was never meant to feel. "I tried not to cry," she said once. "But when I dream, I remember them. And it hurts so much I wake up screaming in silence." Rylan listened. Always listened, because the more she spoke, the more stable the region around her became. As if being understood tethered her, as if laughter, light, even when forced, held her together. The Admiralty issued warnings, then orders, then arrest warrants. But by then, Rylan had rerouted their coordinates to a cloaked moon near a pulsar's edge, building a habitat calibrated to absorb cosmic surges when Lyra's emotional state shifted. He called it the Sanctuary. And every day he worked to make her smile, not because the galaxies depended on it, though they did, but because every time she laughed, the stars outside the dome shimmered instead of shaking. Lyra began to change. Her skin glowed brighter. Her gravity softened. She asked questions. She sang to herself. She reached for Rylan's hand. And the universe did not die. Not that day. Not when she was laughing. But deep inside her the ache remained. A black hole of sorrow she couldn't fully escape. Rylan saw it. And he feared the day when even he might not be enough to keep her tears at bay. Because he wasn't, just making her smile to save galaxies. He was doing it because he loved her, and because if he ever lost her to grief, he knew the universe wouldn't be the only thing to fall apart. Rylan Drake didn't sleep much anymore, but he didn't mind. Not when every minute of wakefulness brought him closer to understanding Lyra, the alien girl whose emotions swayed the stars themselves, whose sorrow once fractured galaxies into silence and whose laughter now held the fabric of space like golden thread. The sanctuary he built, hidden deep within a twilight moon's magnetic shade, had slowly transformed into a living biome unlike any other. Engineered not just to contain Lyra's volatility but to nurture her, to help her feel something other than exile and fear. And she responded to it like a flower tilting toward warmth it had never known. It started with her voice. No longer cryptic or restrained, but curious. Soft questions asked over shared food capsules and stories about Earth's sunsets and the taste of chocolate, which she claimed looked like starstone resin, but melted on the tongue like sadness made sweet. Rylan learned to decode her moods not by reading data graphs but by watching the flicker of light in her eyes, the way her hair, like woven nebulae, shifted in color with her emotion, or how her fingers would sometimes trace patterns into the glowing crystal walls of the dome, carving symbols from languages lost before Earth had cooled. One night, while recalibrating the ion buffers that filtered Lyra's gravitational field, Rylan caught her watching an old Earth video he'd left running in the common area. A comedy sketch from centuries ago, slapstick and ridiculous. She didn't laugh out loud, but she smiled, truly smiled, and for one long breath the stars around the moon shimmered with color no spectrum could register. He approached her gently, uncertain whether to speak, not wanting to disrupt the fragile miracle unfolding, but she turned to him, eyes no longer glassy or distant but alive with a strange kind of hope, and whispered, "It's a strange thing, to laugh and not destroy." That was the moment Rylan knew. She was healing, not fixed, not cured, because Lyra wasn't a disease, wasn't broken, but healing in the way only love and patience could allow. Still, even as joy bloomed, shadows lingered. Lyra's memories came in waves, fragments of a civilization that lived between stars, beings of energy and form who abandoned emotion because their sorrow once triggered collapses of reality. She was their experiment, the one who retained emotional depth so they could study it, control it. But she became too volatile, too sensitive, too real. So they left her behind, alone, forgotten. Rylan wanted to rage on her behalf, to demand justice from gods long vanished into the void, but Lyra only shook her head. "They feared me," she said. "I don't want fear. I want to feel without the universe paying the price." So they trained together, not in combat or containment, but in laughter. Rylan began each day with a ritual, A ridiculous Earth? Joke over synthesized pancakes followed by a challenge. Lyra had to match his tone, mimic his sarcasm, make up a story, or invent a new laugh. They built games around her emotional triggers, mapping how her gravity pulses fluctuated with humor, embarrassment, amusement. It was trial by joy, and slowly the numbers began to stabilize. For the first time she cried, and the galaxy did not die. Just one tear, after he showed her footage of an Earth child's first steps. Awkward, unsteady, innocent. Lyra touched the screen and whispered, "I wish I had that beginning." And the tear fell. But instead of collapse, the space around them brightened, light curving, dancing, forming shapes like petals unfurling in vacuum. Her grief had transmuted into creation, but just as the tides of hope rose, the past found them. A rogue probe drifted too close to the sanctuary, its surveillance lens catching a glimpse of impossible energy signatures. Within days, the Admiralty issued a bounty on Ryland for harboring a Class Omega anomaly. Worse, Lyra's location was no longer secret. They would come, not to understand, but to contain, dissect, erase. Lyra sensed it before Ryland did. One evening, as they lay beneath the artificial aurora of their dome sky, she turned to him and said, "You'll have to choose soon, between me and everything else." Ryland stared at her. This girl who was not human, not quite alien either, but something luminous and fragile, a soul etched in gravity. And he already knew his answer. He would not abandon her, not because she could destroy the cosmos, but because she was the only beautiful thing left in it that had once been broken and chose not to break others. He activated the failsafe protocol, a deep-buried escape vessel, shielded by quantum entanglement tech, designed to blend into background noise. But Lyra hesitated. "If I run, they'll hunt us both, and you'll lose everything." He cupped her face, stared into those galaxy-colored eyes, and said, "Everything I want is right here." They left that night, stars streaking past, the small craft as they dove into hidden corridors of space, folds and tunnels built from forgotten tech buried in dark matter filaments. Days passed, then weeks, and somewhere in that escape, in the stillness between pulses of fear and laughter, Lyra changed again. She no longer laughed just for him, she laughed for herself, for life, for the joy of simply existing without destroying. They found refuge on a drifting Eden, an abandoned terraformed station wrapped in vines and waterfalls, orbiting a black hole that time forgot. Lyra planted real flowers. Ryland built a library. They danced once, to an old Earth melody played, through cracked speakers. And she laughed so loudly that the stars around them echoed the sound, not with collapse, but with light. But peace never lasts. A fleet arrived, silent and cloaked, warships from 100 systems united by fear. They came not to talk, not to listen, but to erase. The girl who cried galaxies into ruin could not be allowed to live. Ryland stood in front of her, alone, armed with nothing but a single command signal, one that would destroy their sanctuary, their history, even themselves, before she could be taken. Lyra looked at him, and for the first time tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from something deeper. Love. "I don't want to hurt them," she whispered, "but I won't let them hurt you." She stepped forward, not to fight, but to speak. Her voice carried through frequencies even the warships couldn't block. She told them her story. She told them about Ryland, and she cried. Not one tear, but many. And instead of death, her tears bloomed across the void, turning weapons into blossoms of light, engines into sculptures of harmony, fleets into constellations of beauty. Her grief became creation. Her sorrow, a new physics. They didn't destroy her. They couldn't. Because in that moment they understood. She was not a weapon. She was the mirror of their own fear, their own pain. And she had learned to feel without unmaking the stars. When the fleet left, Ryland held her close. "You saved them." She smiled, tear-streaked and radiant. No, you saved me. I just remembered how to live. And above them, galaxies once shattered began to reform. Slowly, patiently, like laughter echoing through time. Because love had taught the universe how to survive its own sadness. As the days dragged on, Jalen had grown increasingly desperate. The alien girl, whose name he had learned was Lyra, still hid behind her veil of silence, the weight of her grief consuming her. The sight of her tears had become an unbearable burden, each droplet an echo of something much larger, a cosmic ripple that threatened to tear apart the fabric of existence. Jalen couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what was at stake, but the way she crumbled whenever she cried made his resolve even stronger. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. He had never been someone who believed in fate, nor did he place much stock in the mystical forces that governed the universe. But standing by her side, seeing how her pain manifested in ways that defied logic, it became clear that their connection was not something born of chance. It was something far more significant. He had no idea how, but he knew that somehow his actions, his words, his attempts to bring her comfort were tied to something much greater than himself. He had always been a man of action, a soldier, used to the battlefield and the chaos of war. But this was different. There was no strategy, no mission brief, no plan to follow. There was only Lyra's sorrow and the terrible weight of the universe hanging on every choice he made. He had to make her smile, if only for a moment, if only to stop the galaxies from crumbling into nothingness. Jalen stood at the edge of the cliff, watching the distant stars flicker as if they too were on the brink of collapse. The wind tugged at his hair, carrying with it the scent of the alien world they had crash-landed on. A planet rich in life but heavy with the oppressive sense of loss that clung to Lyra like a shadow. She hadn't spoken since their last encounter, when he had tried, unsuccessfully, to make her laugh with his crude humor, his attempts at lightness falling flat in the face of her overwhelming grief. But he wasn't going to give up. No, Jalen couldn't afford to give up. He couldn't live with the thought of doing nothing while the universe bled out, star by star, as her heart shattered further. So he would try again. He would make her laugh, even if it meant humiliating himself, even if it meant doing things he would never have considered before. He would do whatever it took. He turned around, his eyes scanning the dense alien forest that surrounded them. The trees were twisted, their bark covered in strange moss-like growths that glowed faintly in the low light of the planet's dying sun. The air was thick with the sounds of unseen creatures, their calls distant but haunting. Jalen inhaled deeply, letting the alien air fill his lungs, and then set off back toward the small makeshift shelter where Lyra was resting. He had no idea what he was going to do, no grand plan, no clever idea, but he would figure something out. Lyra had to see that there was still joy to be found, even in the darkest corners of the universe. He reached the shelter, a simple structure, made from the wreckage of their ship, hastily assembled to provide some semblance of comfort. The door was slightly ajar, and as Jalen pushed it open, he found her sitting by the small fire they had managed to start. Her gaze was distant, focused on the flickering flames, and for a moment, she seemed unaware of his presence. It was the same every time. She was lost in her own world, a place where Jalen couldn't reach her, but he wouldn't let that stop him. He cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. "Hey, Lyra, you feeling any better?" She didn't answer, her face still unreadable, her eyes still vacant. Jalen sighed inwardly, but he refused to let the despair take hold of him. He walked over to the fire and sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth, but not so close as to intrude on her space. "I know I'm probably not the best company right now," he said, his voice softer this time. "But I'm here, okay? I'll stay here until you're ready to talk. Or no, maybe not talk, whatever helps." She didn't react, but he didn't expect her to. He couldn't force her to speak, couldn't rush her through her pain. But that didn't mean he had to stop trying. He had to be there, in whatever way she needed him. So, Jalen did what he always did when faced with a problem he couldn't solve through strength or action. He got creative. "I was thinking," he said, trying to keep the tone light. "What if we could find a way to make this place a little more fun?" Lyra's head tilted slightly, the faintest flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Jalen pressed on. "I mean, sure, it's not exactly paradise, but there's got to be something here that can make us laugh. You know, like a game. Ever played one of those?" Still no answer, but Jalen could feel her attention shifting even if it was just a fraction. He took a deep breath and continued, not giving up just yet. All right, he said, pretending to think hard. "What about this? We take turns making weird noises. You go first and I'll try to copy you." He raised his eyebrows, waiting for her reaction. "It'll be hilarious, trust me." He waited in silence, the crackling of the fire filling the void between them. Then, to his surprise, Lyra let out a sound, a small hesitant chuckle that caught him off guard. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a flicker of light in the darkness. He grinned, encouraged by the sound, and leaned forward. "Oh, that's a good one. Now it's my turn." He made a ridiculous noise, something between a squeal and a grunt, and waited for her to react. To his delight, Lyra's lips twitched, and she let out another soft laugh. It wasn't much, but it was more than he had hoped for. He pressed on, determined to keep the momentum going. The game became more ridiculous with each passing moment, both of them making the silliest, most outlandish sounds they could think of, until they were both laughing, a genuine, unrestrained laugh that echoed through the small shelter. For the first time since they had crashed on this desolate world, Jalen felt the weight of the universe lift, if only for a moment. He had made her laugh. She had laughed. And for that fleeting instant, everything felt just a little less heavy. The galaxies might still be dying, but here in this tiny corner of the universe there was a spark of light, a glimmer of hope. And that was enough. For now, it was enough. As the days passed, the game of making each other laugh became their ritual. The forest, the wreckage, the burning sky, all of it seemed to fade away when Lyra and Jalen shared those moments, those absurd, uncontainable bursts of laughter. Each one felt like a victory, a small rebellion against the sadness that had threatened to consume them both. It was hard to explain the connection they shared, but it was real. She didn't speak much, not yet. But her eyes were different. The darkness that had clouded them when he first met her was slowly lifting, and with it Jalen felt the weight of his own heart grow lighter. But as much as he found solace in their moments of laughter, he knew the underlying truth. He couldn't keep her pain at bay forever. The galaxies were still dying, their light flickering out like distant candles snuffed by an invisible hand. Every time Lyra cried, the universe trembled, and Jalen felt that tremor in his bones. He had seen the reports before, had heard the warnings of cosmic rifts and the fragility of their very existence, and he knew deep down that nothing could last forever. Not the laughter, not the joy. There would come a time when her sorrow would return, and with it, the destruction of everything they knew. But for now, they had each other. And that was all that mattered. He had learned that in the moments they spent together, time slowed. The universe could fall apart and they could keep laughing, keep existing in their own bubble of defiance. But even bubbles had a way of popping. One evening, as they sat together watching the stars dim once more, Lyra turned to him, her gaze steady for the first time in days. Her lips parted, and for the first time since he had known her, she spoke. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, but the words were clear. "I don't want to hurt them anymore." The words hit Jalen like a bolt of lightning, and his heart skipped a beat. He had known that Lyra's grief was not something she could escape easily, but to hear her acknowledge it, her own pain, the consequences of her tears, it sent a chill through him. He reached out, placing his hand on hers, trying to offer some comfort, though he wasn't sure how. "You're not hurting anyone," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's not your fault. You didn't ask for this." But Lyra shook her head, her dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Every time I cry, It feels like I'm tearing the universe apart. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Jalen's heart ached for her. He had no answers, no magic solution to fix the damage that had been done. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. He had already made her laugh. But now, it was time to do something bigger. He had to show her that there was still hope, that the universe wasn't just a series of cold, indifferent forces, but something that could be shaped by the choices they made, by the love they shared. He squeezed her hand, his voice steady. Then we'll face it together. I don't know how to fix everything, but I know I'll stand by you. We'll figure this out one step at a time. Lyra looked at him, and for the first time a small, fragile smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't much, but it was enough. In that moment, Jalen knew that he didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to fix everything. All he had to do was be there, be the person who didn't give up on her, who didn't walk away when things got too hard. As the days turned into weeks, Jalen continued to stand by her side, offering his laughter, his strength, his presence. And slowly, the galaxy's tremors grew less frequent. It wasn't an immediate fix, and there were still moments of darkness, but they were starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Lyra began to speak more, her voice no longer a whisper, but a steady, soft cadence that filled the space between them. The world around them didn't change, at least not in the ways they wanted, but their bond grew stronger. And somehow, that made all the difference. One evening, as they sat beneath the vast alien sky, Lyra looked at Jalen with a sense of peace he hadn't seen in her before. I think I can live with this, she said, her voice steady. Not because it's easy, but because I'm not alone anymore. Jalen smiled, a weight lifting from his chest. He had done what he set out to do. He had made her laugh, made her smile, and shown her that the universe, for all its cruelty, still had moments of tenderness, moments of light. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a savior. But in that moment, as he looked at Lyra, the girl who had taught him the meaning of resilience, he realized that sometimes the greatest victories weren't the ones won on battlefields or through grand gestures. Sometimes the greatest victories were the quiet ones, like laughing in the face of a dying universe, like choosing to live and love even when everything else seemed to fall apart. And in the end, that was enough. The galaxies might continue to die, stars might continue to fade, but as long as they had each other, Jalen knew they could face whatever came next. Together, they could withstand anything, and that, in the vastness of the cosmos, was the most powerful thing of all.